few minutes. We're still waiting for Fletch and Alex as well. So I was going to message Fletch and remind him. Apparently he joins on his phone and he's at cricket. There's a high chance of that.
Good on him. He's putting his time to good use.
There's Al. Al's gone there. More promote to panelist. Hey Al, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Can you hear me? All of the above?
Yeah, can see you both now. You cool? You having a okay week so far?
Yeah, not bad. Actually been quite a few calls that I now need to write up. So, yeah.
What have we got to write them up for?
Oh, just roles and, yeah, you know what it's like when you're not in person. And I normally have a little bit of flip chart, post-it action all going on, but now it's a bit more sort of downloading. But no, all good.
So I'm just going to plug my laptop in. I can hear you.
I feel like my light is coming out of my head. I think I might go and turn it off, actually. Excuse me, 2 seconds. Better. Looks less like I'm beaming.
Andy, did you prepare any slides or anything, or are you just gonna chat?
So just going to chat, really, mate. I haven't done any slides. I'm happy to sort of do a bit of a download, and then if anyone's got any questions, I don't know if you've got any directed questions or if there's anything, any areas you want to talk about.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely ask you some questions,
Okay,
and I'll definitely let people post questions in there in a bit. We'll give it a few more minutes. And we'll get going. Classic Fletch. He's all over the place.
Don't worry, Rusty, this is getting you good with dealing with these slightly, constrained environmental situations that...
I'm always constrained with them. I quite like it.
I just think you rise to this. I think you're seeing you at your best.
Yeah, well, you mean because last time Wilco was like in and out and come on, Wilco's doing my head in. I'm joking if he's on, which he's not, so that's okay. Yeah, they've been doing all the RFU interviews, I think, in the last couple of weeks. So it's...
have they cut down the number of roles, or have they asked everyone just to reapply?
They cut down the roles by 104.
I knew it was a lot, but it was 104. Right, okay.
Yeah. But there's still jobs being, so you keep finding...
Yeah.
There he is. He's in the car. Hello, mate. You all right?
Hey, mate.
Who's in the passenger seat there?
Holding the computer.
Oh, Ted.
Football.
Mate, that's cool, kid. You look like you were playing for Liverpool in the FA Cup final in 1988, I think it was.
So I'm here. I'm in. It literally take me about 6 or 7 minutes to get home. So
yeah, of course it will. We'll get it going in a few. We'll give you a chance. We'll live that journey with you, Fletch. Dad, did you win? Most important thing, did you win?
It was just training.
Yeah, but did you win in training?
Yeah.
Yeah, well done, mate. Extra pocket money.
I'm not sure there was any.
Played a game at the end.
Oh, did he play a game?
Played a game. Ted won, mate. Pay attention. Was your dad coaching?
No.
Nah. Not allowed coach football. I just coach rugby, don't I? So.
Nice.
How's everybody? Everybody all right?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Fletch.
Yeah,
good.
All well, Fletch. Thank you.
Awesome. I'll put the video up, but I can hear everything.
Yeah, mate, that's cool.
I'll be home in, as I say, 5-6 minutes.
Cool. We'll give a couple more minutes and then we'll get going. 4 minutes past. You've got there's quite a few jobs though still, isn't there? So you keep finding jobs everywhere, Andy. And
so there are, and that's a really interesting point we could talk about tonight, is that there are lots of jobs out there. They might not just be the jobs people want, but yeah, there are some. The RFU put 2 up recently in Yorkshire. That was interesting. I didn't see that coming.
I'm sure there's people on this call that understand more about that one than me.
Yes.
Was the interviews today?
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
So
So,
why did they advertise it, Fletch, and not do it internally?
There must be something to do with HR. They probably had to.
Right.
I think you only interviewed one external.
Okay. Was it an external that used to work at Yorkshire?
Well, when I mean the internals, there's people who were in the post before they were made redundant.
Ah, fine. Okay, cool.
got you.
We applied for it, but I think it was one additional person.
Nice.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's a bit weird.
Sweet. Well, let's get going, and it's recording anyway, so people can always catch up with it. We'll put it on YouTube. Thanks for jumping on, everyone. I hope everyone's well. Andy was due to be on the original webinar, but we couldn't get him on, and he appears to be a man with a plan, especially around rugby, from a finding jobs, and I tend to send people your way when talking about CVs and stuff like that as well, so we'll probably delve into that. Alex, thanks for jumping on again. Useful as ever as last time, so pitch in as and when, and fingers crossed Fletch gets home in one piece and then we can remember what he looks like. I haven't really thought that far about this, Andy, but I mean, do you want to kind of tell people who you are, what you do, and how come like you seem to know where all the jobs are in rugby?
Oh, no worries at all, mate. So hello, everyone. Andy Lockwood. I run something called Rugby Vacancies, and if you're watching or listening to this, then hopefully you'll follow what I do on social media. Essentially, what I do in a nutshell is connect coaches and people with jobs around the world that are involved with rugby. And I've been doing it informally and formally since 2017, so for about 3 years now. I find jobs from all over the place and put them in a single location to make it easy. It all started when I found myself with no involvement in rugby for the first time in about 30 years, which is a really strange feeling. And I was looking around for jobs, finding ones that weren't suitable for me because I was in the wrong place or wrong time. And I'd be messaging mates and friends saying, oh, this is near you, have you considered it? And after about 5 or 6 of these messages, I thought, why don't I just put it in the same place and then people can come and look at it? And hence how Rugby Vacancies were born.
I was just putting something in the chat box, so I'll save myself. If anyone's got any questions, then definitely put them in there. So yeah, I mean, I mean, how are you finding all these jobs? What's your advice for people at the moment who are potentially, being made redundant or concerned about it? And even interestingly, I mean, this is quite random, but I've had a couple of performance coaches who are in jobs and have contracts who've messaged me and gone, I'm actually worried that, this club's going to be unsustainable in a few months' time, and can you help me with my CV type stuff? So what's your advice to people?
So I think there's 2 things that people can consider at the moment. One is working for someone else, which probably most people will have done if they've been made redundant, or work for yourself or work for someone else. If you want to find a job with an organisation, there's loads of really good places to look. I'm biased, but I'd say Rugby Vacancies is one. And if you're based in the UK, then UK Sport, the jobs page for UK Sport is absolutely fantastic. Each of the home unions has their own page or site for jobs, so they're always worth a look. Also, if you're further afield, so if you're still in the UK and you're considering other avenues, and the Times Education Supplement is their jobs board is a great place to look for rugby or sports roles in schools. You don't necessarily have to be a teacher. Some of the roles are not teaching based; they are head of rugby or director of rugby or something like that. So that's another good place.
You mean the Times the test stuff?
Yes, yeah. So that's a really good place for school-based roles where you don't necessarily have to be a teacher, because they might be sport coach roles rather than PE teacher. If you're outside the UK, If you're in sort of Australia and New Zealand, then somewhere called Sports People is always worth a look. And that's a little bit like UK Sport in that it has a whole range of jobs, from coaching to administration to leadership type jobs, all across all sports and all sectors in Australia and New Zealand. If you're in the US, there's a couple of good places. Teamwork is one good one for the US. And also the NCAA careers page is fantastic for sports and sports related jobs if you're based in the US.
I mean, and maybe we'll get into some of the detail around some of this stuff, but actually, have you placed coaches in, have you helped? Because I know you were, I was trying to get a job with you at one point, and so have you played my dream job.
So that one, yeah. So in short, yes, I have, and I do, as well as the sort of the general broad sort of rugby roles via Rugby Vacancies. I also do, I suppose if you were a high street recruiter, you'd call it executive search. So I can find individuals and place them. So for example, Mark Jones at the Crusaders, I sort of put those people together. I also assisted Fiji in their search for a coach, although Vern Cotter wasn't one of the guys I put forward. I've helped a couple of professional teams, the Southern Kings a while ago, although that was about 18 months ago, and they're on the lookout for a new coach. So I can certainly help coaches be placed if there is a requirement, and if people reach out to me and say we're a club or a franchise and we're looking for A, B, and C. Because of the network that Rugby Vacancies has, I can almost pinpoint those individuals who might suit that and reach out.
Nice, and I'm going to pick up on Marcus's question in the box, because Marcus, I did see your email. I finished on Zoom about 20 minutes ago, and I saw it, and I was going to respond to it. But he's been like a team manager or administration. So are we talking about that stuff as well? Because I'm imagining there'll be people here that are coaches who are performance end or club type stuff, but also there'll be people who've been development officers. There'll be people that have been involved in administration and the stuff that sits around sport as well. Are you endorsing all those sites for that? Is there any other stuff they should be aware of?
So in terms of, if it's rugby related, I'll probably put it on Rugby Vacancies. If it's sport related, and so across various sports, then if you're UK based, UK Sport is a really good place for that, for their jobs page. They have loads of those kinds of jobs across all sports sectors, not just rugby, which is kind of where I concentrate.
Okay, cool. And just to give people a heads up, we're going to do another one on the 21st that'll delve into any stuff deeper. And actually, one of the people that I'm going to get on works for Abbott, the pharmaceuticals, and he said people don't apply for jobs with us from sport because they're not aware of their transferable skills either. So, Alex, you're nodding your head around the UK Sport. I'm going to definitely ask Andy about a bit more stuff later. But what's the UK Sport pages like, and what's your recommendation to people around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really helpful to hear Andy's feedback, because the user experience is can be different across the board, but that is certainly the go-to. It's like a bulletin board you can scroll through, and quite often, the way that it's set up means that you can link to any of the sports there, which is just really helpful, practical sort of, you can understand what type of organisation or environment the role's based in. I think to the point we were talking about earlier, there are a whole range of jobs on there, from part-time to full-time, from team manager operations, performance operations, working more in participation or development, as well as all the performance-focused roles as well. So you get the whole range, and I suppose as a practical step, and one of the things I'm really keen that we position as part of these sessions is, as a practical step, just going on that is really helpful for thinking about, well, where can I join some of the dots to where I might want to go, and figure out next steps for me as well. So I'd certainly say that. And then to your guide about Abbott transferable skills, without sort of forecasting where we're going to go later on and in other sessions, I do think at a time like this, where you might be feeling a little bit vulnerable or trying to think about where next and what have I got, and maybe feeling a bit more like, where's my confidence around some of these areas, really exploring some of those transferable skills is helpful, but often just looking at the language that's used in other roles can start that and trigger you to do that. But taking that initial first step and just looking at some other jobs boards is really helpful, and certainly the uksport.gov.uk one's a really good one to start with.
Nice. And then the other thing I was thinking a little bit about, Andy, and Marcus has put a bit more stuff on there, and I'll definitely connect the two, Marcus, I'll connect the two of you up. Definitely going to go into CV in a second. So on these sites, do you upload CVs? Because that's something I've done in a couple of places where I've uploaded my CV and actually people kind of get in touch with you as well.
Yeah, so a lot of the places will offer that feature. So you can apply directly online without having to do the kind of traditional send your CV in or even email it in. But I definitely think it's worth people at the moment having a CV, having a generic CV ready to go, then tailor accordingly to the job. That's a real key thing if we're talking about CVs.
Yeah, I was going to say. So when I send people towards you with CVs. What type of conversations are you having with them?
So CVs are interesting. If you ask 10 people, you get 10 different answers on what a CV should hold. But I think the first step is for someone to literally Google CV formats and find one that they like, because your CV is a reflection of you. It's an extension of you on paper. And so the format and the style should reflect the individual rather than just a blank generic piece of paper. It reflects you as an individual. That's the first thing. The second thing then is, by all means, have a full CV that might run to 4, 5, 6 pages or so. Keep that as your standalone document. And then as a job comes up that you apply for, you then, in a practical sense, save as, and then delete all the stuff that is not relevant. And slightly alter the bits that are relevant to make them particularly relevant to that job, so that CV that you send in is actually specific to the role you're applying for. I see quite a few CVs, and it's a bit of a generalization, but people do not tailor the CV. So what you really want to do is give the person reading it absolutely no doubt or question that you are the person for that job. And a generic CV that gets sent out at a click of a button is not helpful for the person applying for the job. It also doesn't help the person who's looking, because when they read it, they have to sort of scrutinize it and try and work out whether you're suitable. Whereas actually, if you've tailored it accordingly, specifically to the job you're applying for, it leaves them in no doubt that you have the experience and are relevant for that role. Nice,
and I'll maybe get you to jump in, Fletch, at some point, because we've just looked through a huge amount of CVs, helping an NGB out with their recruitment stuff. This is a genuine question, Andy, because I get freaked out by this. It's like the first time I saw someone taking notes on an iPad, and I was like, what are you doing? Like, I've seen people with pictures on their CVs, and because I'm old, like, I think it's like, it doesn't look right to me. So Ed Robinson, who's at Jersey now, like, said, oh, Rusty, could you have a look at my CV? And I was like, it looks like a newspaper. And so I genuinely didn't know like what to say. And then I just had an hour last week with someone where we went through his CV and did what you said, really, and tailored it. What's the stuff they're asking for the job? How can you demonstrate it? What parts, when have you done this stuff? What are the skills that when you did this role, it helped you with? Pictures, yes or no?
That is up to the individual. I've seen some with pictures, some without. I've seen some who had their picture as the watermark with the text over the front. I've seen others who've just got a little thumbnail picture in the corner of them. Others, no picture, just text. Again, it should reflect you as a person. So if you as an individual like having your picture on your CV, keep it on there. If you're someone who doesn't, take it off. It should reflect you as far as possible as an individual. And so that's one of those things that's very much up to choice, really.
Fletch, what have you noticed? Because you've just looked through about 25 CVs recently.
Yeah, I think most of what I've seen has been quite traditional. Actually, my wife does employability at the university type stuff, and And yeah, there would be a lot more creativity around CVs now. So I would give it some thought. Probably check into who you're sending the CV to. So what would be the expectations around that type stuff? But I do think that there is more creativity in what I'm hearing from her around people sharing like what they've been up to and what people have said. But the vast majority of the stuff that I've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks has been quite traditional. But that's maybe because the NGB, that's kind of what they were asking for, I guess. I don't think I'm answering it, but I do feel as though you would find out who you try and get some employment by and then sort of tailor the CV, but maybe think a bit more creatively in terms of how people have been writing them in the past. So pictures and all of that sort of stuff, I think I think that's what people are expecting now.
I've also seen people submit a video CV as well. And that's a really interesting way forward.
Yeah, it is. And I think it'll be the norm relatively soon, that it'll be a bit more, sort of video type messaging and a bit more creative. But yeah, just to check out who you're trying to get the job with, really. I mean, Alex, what's your thoughts? If somebody sent you a video or somebody sent some stuff, had some pictures of their family and the stuff that was important to them, and
you're always trying to look to get a really good insight into who's behind the paper or the video or whatever, and obviously a video offers a really good way of doing that. I think one of the impacts of where we've all been with the COVID will be that we will be doing a lot more things virtually, so getting comfortable in front of a camera at some point and moving along in your career are going to be very interconnected, I think. So that's one thing I would sort of pick up on. Just to the point of pictures and images, what I found interesting with that is the reaction that it's had with people who have actually been on the panel or shortlisting. It's certainly created a discussion. So if you want to have impact, doing something a bit different is considered one of those ways. Now, so I don't really, photos or not photos, but I've seen very, quite allergic reactions to some pictures, and then other people think it's the most brilliant thing. So I think it's just sort of managing that as well. But the really key thing with the CV, and having benefited from lots of eye rollings and having to talk about CVs and people finding it quite a personal difficulty and challenge to do it, is actually it does need to be that extension of you. It needs to be something that you are proud of, and it does represent who you are, because ultimately that's going to be your connector to your future opportunity. So I think keeping it as something that is meaningful to you and does speak to the experiences that you've had, but does it in an engaging way, and that's the real sort of the key bit with it, which isn't necessarily an easy thing to do. So I think those would be my sort of thoughts and reflections, having seen a number as well. Andy, I suppose from just your experience, it's a little bit like with LinkedIn, where people have the sort of paragraph at the top, and some people like that in their CV as well. If that shows a flavour of who you are as a person and what type of team member you will be, that can only be really a good thing. It just needs to be crafted in a way that people can get that essence of you, because I think people and employers now really look for that culture and that environment fit from a new person or someone coming in. So I would suggest thinking about that as well. Again, I wouldn't want to teach anybody on the call how to suck eggs, but I just think there are some little things that it's like you're just trying to give them a flavour of who you are, so that it's the right role for you.
Alex, I think you're absolutely right, and that bit of prose at the top, that some people I've spoken to don't use it, don't like it. Others feel it's a really important part to set the scene or to set your CV. And I think if you're going to include it, I think you're 100% right. It needs to reflect you, not just a load of buzzwords. We're all proactive, we're all good team players, and so on and so on. It really needs to reflect you, because the panel or whoever's looking at it will get a flavour of who you are, and it will begin to set the tone for them thinking that you're suitable for the job.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I was thinking about. I just written down on the CVs. One was the bit, and I got the same as you, Alex. I started having some allergic reactions. I had an allergic reaction to the generic list of skills. So there's obviously a setting that will allow you to go, I'm a great team player, I'm blah, blah, blah. And then alongside it, like just a list of things that people had done, as opposed to actually probably, and maybe it's me, just bringing to life actually when I was assistant team manager here, it was A, B and C, and some of the stuff, the skills you'd done or some of the stuff you'd learned. Someone's asked a question actually, Reese has asked a question which was interesting for me because this came up in interviews. Again, I had a lot of people who've like bounced between jobs. So I think Reese has put about best way to explain leaving a coaching job after 8 months, in brackets, pre-planned and organised. But actually I had a lot of people, and once again, and I kind of guess they've had lots of experiences, but they're lasting 6 to 8 months in a job and then going somewhere else. What's your thoughts around that, Andy? How are you explaining that one away?
So I wouldn't have an issue with that at all. My background, my sort of military background was you change jobs every 12 to 24 months. Admittedly within the military, but you change jobs every 12 to 24 months. So as an individual, I wouldn't have an issue with that, as long as the person could explain it. I don't mean being nosy or prying, but if they simply said, actually, I arrived at this job, it was only a short-term contract and therefore I moved on at the end of it, fine. Or they say, actually, if you're asked, why did you only stay in the job for 6 months? It's completely legitimate to have a reasonable answer to say, I did the job for 6 months. I realised actually it wasn't for me, so I looked elsewhere. And 6 months of doing something is probably better than a 6 month gap where you can't explain what you were doing for 6 months.
Yeah. And then my next thing I was going to ask you, when I connect people with you and they ask you about interviews, what are you telling them? And then I'm sure me and Fletch have got some stories, because something that I've not, so Zoom interviews. So someone we were helping a little bit with some stuff had an interview last week, and her internet cut out 3 times during the interview. So, yeah, what advice are you giving around interviews? And then some will be in person, some will be Zoom.
So I think at the moment, there's definitely a tendency at the moment, because of the situation, for things to be done remotely. But I still think some of the old rules apply, even on a Zoom or Skype interview. And that is, if it looks like you're sat in the toilet, the people on the other side are going to think that's where you're sat. So consider your background, wear something appropriate as if it was a face-to-face interview. If you were going to go into an organisation, an interview, and you would be expected to wear a jacket, a shirt, a tie maybe, if that's the case, then still do that, even for a Zoom or a Skype interview. Some of the old rules haven't changed. I think that there is a more lenience in terms of internet connection and things like that. People invariably might actually be doing it on their phone, and internet connections go down. These things happen. It would be similar to if someone said, my car broke down on the way here, I'm really sorry I'm late for the interview. So be it, these things happen. Some people might have an issue with it. I certainly wouldn't. But I think some of the old rules still apply that people might not have considered, and doing it in your t-shirt, shorts and flip-flops perhaps doesn't set the right tone, unless you're going to work for Quicksilver or Billabong or something like that.
What are you thinking, Alex? You'll have interviewed a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to follow on from that sort of prepared bit, and also a little bit, I mean, I spoke about this last time, about some of the sort of emotions that you go through with various stages of jobs, and applying being one of them. And I think one of the key things is how you feel when you're going for it. And if you really mean that you want to get the job and take it seriously, obviously sitting there in your flip-flops and shorts might not be the best way of preparing yourself mentally for it anyway. But I think there's certainly the other side of things as well, which is, it seems a little bit the obvious, but I've been on a number of calls and situations where this hasn't happened, where how you engage with the camera. So I've been on calls with people who have not had really much eye contact with any of the other panelists. They've not really shared themselves overtly to the sort of group. And that's quite challenging when you're interviewing and talking. And I suppose that's one of the things that I've tried to help people afterwards, because of the virtual nature that we've all been through, and again has been a bit of a change. So I think sort of coming on from Andy's point there, it's just about a little bit around some self-management, so being prepared, putting yourself in the best possible mental state, to give your best. And then just being able to be well practiced about dealing with the vagaries of technology and IT. So, I mean, it sounds simple, but, you know, I've been on a number of calls where people have arrived late because they didn't have the right app or they didn't have this or that. And, you know, and I've purposely always try now to log in a bit earlier. So the very simple bits that show that you are there, that you're present, that you're connected, and also you're just efficient at managing yourself as well. And they do go a long way. And then to the point of internet cutting out and things like that, how you manage that is a really good display of, you know, your behaviours, who you are and things like that, where you just say, look, sorry, you know, these things happen. And if people do go one way about it and don't accept it, you will then probably question whether that's the right environment for you as well. So it's a bit give and get with the interview process in itself. But all I encourage people to do is, look, you just want to give your best, don't you? So just take into account some of these things as well.
What do you think in Fletch? You've just done a load of interviews.
Yeah, I mean, everything that has been said, trying to come across as personable, you know, sort of end in mind stuff, really. You know, what's the stuff you definitely want to get across? Give that some thought. I think people get really technical around the questions and the task, and that's clearly important to be able to demonstrate the skills and that you feel are going to be important, but also, yeah, just, you know, what's your 4 or 5 best bits, trying to ensure that they come across and be really personable. So as you said, the eye contact, be fully engaged, be in the appropriate place, and also be authentic. You know, so if you are a reasonable cheeky chappy, then come across as a reasonable cheeky chappy type. Don't try to be something else. So we did a number of interviews last week, and the people who really came out were the ones who I actually felt as though they gave a best of themselves, really. They were really authentic. Albeit our part of the interview was quite informal, so I think we probably helped out a bit, maybe.
I wrote some stuff down. Obviously, I've got some stories. So I did have a toilet, Andy. He was in the toilet, but he wasn't on the toilet. And I said, it looks like you're on the toilet. He said, I'm not on the toilet, but I'm in the toilet. And we were doing the relatively informal stuff. So my suggestion was, don't be on the toilet later. I had someone who was at a service station because they hadn't planned their journey. And so he was on his phone in a room full of people in a service station. And I'm chilled with it, but it definitely didn't help him because he dropped the phone about 4 times, and it was a little bit stressful. A couple of people just are like really nervous, but I love the fact they said, "I'm really nervous because I really want this job," and I'm all in on that stuff, that they were honest. My other piece of advice that I kept telling people is so when you look at the advert for if you want to give money to the blind, then they tell you the story of the guy that almost died on the road first, and you go, oh, and then they kind of give you the information, and some people could have told some stories or given some examples. So one guy spoke about, actually, when I was a young player, this is the stuff I experienced, and so therefore, as a coach, I don't want to be like that type thing. And so how can you capture people with stories? Be careful of your language. So one guy, actually, it was a women's job, and he kept talking about lads. And I said, you can't say lads this afternoon. He did. And then the other question that I asked them that was really interesting was because I think you've got to consider this, is why am I not going to get the job? So I just said to them, look, when you woke up this morning and you were coming for the interview, what was the nagging doubt around why you wouldn't get this job? And some people just said, I don't know what it is. And some people went, well, it's this. Actually, I'm not that good at planning. So actually, you might need to then consider, if that's going to be your empty chair, then how are you going to convince people? And that might be as simple as using, like Fletch used to do, use words like plan and detail, and without necessarily knowing what it means. But just, but using that. But I think we've got to be thinking of course you've got to think, what are my strengths, but what's going to stop me? The other one that was interesting was one of the girl who we helped. She didn't know that on Teams you could tessellate everything, so she only had one person on. So she was being interviewed by 3 people, but you could only see one. And she found that, and because she hadn't practiced doing it with a number of people on, and she wasn't aware that function was available. And she said that she found that really hard because she couldn't see people's reactions to it. Yeah, that was some stuff. And then actually the question I asked that people really struggled with was, and maybe it's something for people to think about, how are you developing self-awareness? And if you could have a coach developer for a year, how would you use them? And I just keen to see how aware people were of themselves and their strengths, and how they would develop themselves. Someone just sent like an individual question that I think is a great question, actually, Andy, for you. And it was like, if you're young, so this is someone who's 18 and you haven't had previous jobs, so clearly there'll be plenty of people on here who've had previous stuff. What's your advice to a 18-year-old just entering the labour force for the first time? What are you suggesting?
That's really, it's a great question, actually, because if you have not decided to go to university and so you're 18, you finish school and you'll have your A levels and whatever you've done at school, my suggestion would be you may have a long-term goal in mind, but the short-term reality is that actually probably any kind of work will give you experience and transferable skills that you can draw on that will help you in the medium to long term with either getting or looking for that kind of dream job or that field or career that you're looking for. When I left school, I went to Australia to play rugby, and I was a bin man, I was a handyman, I did all sorts of jobs like that. But then when I finished college and then went out into the workplace, and we said, well, what experience have you got? I said, well, I had a bit of a portfolio of jobs ranging from customer service and the skills I acquired, but that was all because I'd had 5, 6, 7 different experiences of different jobs in different areas. Everything, bin man, fruit packing, working in a shop, and so on and so on. So if you have a perceived lack of experience, I think have a long-term goal in mind and work out areas where you could work or you might consider working in order to give you broader experience for later on.
What's everyone else thinking about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in there. I think it's a really good question about being at that different end of the labour market, as you say. And I think the one thing that I do talk quite a lot, I've given a few talks to people, school leavers, and deciding how to plan and make best next steps. And I think it's also important to think about what you really connect with. So you can have your long-term goal of being ex-coach or whatever it might be in chosen sport or in rugby, but actually how are you going to supplement that? How are you going to supplement your knowledge and understanding? And then how are you going to also pay a few bills along the way? Because we all need to do that. And I mean, I suppose one of the things that as part of my role I do a fair bit of is career mapping. So what are some of the experiences and skill sets that you've developed, and what are the different roles you've had? And I don't tend to go too far back, and it's more sort of focused on leadership roles, but the amount of people that have worked in the service industry who have worked and become really good at working with people, they've worked in hospitality, and they've really learned some really good skills about managing communication, working under pressure, delivering food, drinks, whatever it is. And certainly that's something that at the sort of 18 to 22 age bracket is, and earlier, has been and continues to be a bit of a thread through everybody, that they've worked in that industry. And I think that taking on any opportunity is always great and you'll figure it out, but just have a sense of where you're going, what you're connected to and what you're passionate about, because that will fulfill you when you might be getting a bit bored of doing some of the grunt side of it. So I do think, to Andy's point about the long-term aim, do have that in mind about where you want to get to and what really lights your fire, and then be comfortable that the rest of it will fill in the gaps, but you will need to get paid to do something. But what industry and area you go into might help you on that journey a bit quicker.
What are you thinking, Fletch? Is Ollie almost 18? Is he 17? He's not Q1, is he?
He is Q1. It's his birthday soon. I was listening on the radio today, and there's a guy who's been hanging out as a monk, and now he's not a monk, and he's been on this bit of a journey, and he was going on about purpose because he was.
Is it the Headspace guy?
Yeah, what's his name? I can't recall. I think it's like a Monk's Guide to Happiness type.
Okay.
I'll find out the name of the book. I can't remember, but he was just talking about purpose, and he mentioned 3 words, and Alex, you mentioned 2 of them. So passion. So find out what you're really passionate about. Find out what your strengths are, or not find out, just like, your purpose should be towards the stuff that you're both passionate about and you're really good at, your strengths. And then the other one, which not many people would maybe use this word, would be compassionate. So like, have purpose where you're given to people. That was his take around getting some clarity in sort of individual purpose, and it's what he's been working through, and he's written this book. And I thought it was a really nice way about thinking about it, in terms of people losing their jobs. I'm in a similar position, self-employed. And it definitely made me think, is the stuff that I'm doing, am I really passionate about? Am I playing to my strengths? And like, am I giving some stuff back? That compassionate bit, am I like helping people? Am I actually giving something back? I don't know if that's helpful. It just resonated with me when I was listening on the radio. I'll try and find out who it was. What are you thinking, Rusty?
Oh.
Rusty, are you still there, mate?
Yeah, mate. I think my internet went crazy. Maybe Bristol have scored again. There is some, so RFU do like young leaders and stuff like that, don't they? I would get in touch with your local, if you're passionate about rugby, I would get in touch with TPP, PDG type stuff. I know some of the activity isn't going on, but some is. And I know Ryan Davis is an ex-player, and he's now coaching the first team at Bath. But he started out volunteering at Bath DPP. And he did that for a couple of years before anything happened. So I guess it depends how long and you can afford and you're willing to wait. I would say yes to lots of things, and I just think getting the chance to observe. So going and hanging with different people. People will say to me, "Oh, I'm really lucky I got that job," and I'm thinking you're not, because you knew some people. So I found it hard when we interviewed Fletch, because I had a couple of people that were like related to people I knew, or they knew people I knew really well, and that immediately gave me a little bit of a bias towards them. So I had to kind of rein that in a little bit. But the connection stuff is critical.
Yeah, I've just put, I can't pronounce his name, but it's from the one. It was an interesting, if you are probably thinking you're a little bit rudderless and you're looking for your next adventure, it was a really good listen. I enjoyed what he was talking about. So there you go. Sorry, just to finish the story, I've just put the link on so people can maybe download and listen to it, and hopefully it's helpful.
Any other stuff you're thinking about, Andy, that I haven't asked you about yet?
Can I ask Andy a question, Andy? Can I ask?
Yes,
So, is there other people like? I know you said at the start, and this is where to go. But what about other sports? Or is there equivalent of Andy around football or some of the other team sports, cricket or netball or hockey or?
Yes, I'm not really sure. There is, for cricket, there is, I think he's called, I'm going to get his name wrong now. Surname's Lavery. It's Mark or James Lavery, I think. He runs Jobs in Cricket. So if you're on Twitter, just search Jobs in Cricket. and it's pretty much Rugby Vacancies, but for cricket. So it's all sorts of cricket roles, from development to coaching. So I know that exists. Football.
Mate, I'm going straight on that, by the way.
Yeah, that's it.
Football, I'm not really sure, because I haven't really sort of played or followed football since I was a kid. So I don't. There probably is, and there's loads of, Twitter or Google or social media is a really useful tool to, even if you just typed in, I don't know, jobs in football, in Twitter, you'd probably find a couple of people that were doing that kind of thing, or jobs in something. I don't, it's definitely worth a Google. And I believe there's a few. If you're into sort of performance and strength and conditioning, I also do S&C vacancies. So if that's your thing, you can have a look at that. And that's pretty similar. But in terms of sport, yeah, jobs in cricket is one. But otherwise, I definitely have a little search of jobs in insert your sport.
Nice. No, that makes sense. And again, apologies, you might have already said this at the very start. So can people, so do you keep a list of like people? So say I sent you my information. As stuff came in, would you have some form of system around trying to link? Is that something that would be useful to people on here, that actually send you some stuff and of their sort of desired jobs and their skills and their experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So if people want to reach out because they think that they're in the market for a new job, that's absolutely fine. The first port of call I always say is check Rugby Vacancies, because I update it daily, or most days anyway. The second thing I say is, if I've got your information and I know you're looking and something comes in, then I can always join the dots. That depends on the kind of role someone's looking for. If it's, I want to go and work, I want to be the head coach of the Crusaders, that's a tough gig, and there's only a few people in the world that will probably be realistically in for that. If they say, actually, I want to go and do rugby development anywhere in the world and I'm happy to travel, then I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, if a job comes up being the rugby development officer for Rugby Brazil, then, that's an option for them. So the more specific people are, the harder it is to place them.
Andy, can I ask another question? Probably, apologies to be hogging it. Where do you think it's gone? The sport a little bit around the job market. So what are the skills? So if people are on here, and what sort of stuff do you think would be helpful for them over the next 6 to 12 months, or possibly if they don't either have some experiences or possibly some qualifications, what sort of stuff would be useful? What's your view on that? And Alex, the same for you, really. Where is sport heading in terms of the different roles? It was only 2 or 3 years ago that sort of culture became really explicit, and it was really helpful that sort of sports were looking for people who had some sort of experiences around that. Shoot.
Alex, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I think in terms of skill sets, I feel a bit like I'm going to come back to some of the words you used to say, Fletch, but hopefully in a more positive way. So planning and project management, I know but it's classic. People want to be able to understand that you've got a little bit of a time frame, some deadlines you're going to work to, and some deliverables. And whatever that looks like and whatever world you've come from, if you're a coach leading sessions, you will have all of that, and you will have it over periodized over a certain time frame. But it's just the language that's used sometimes. But if we're looking at core skills that you're thinking about, I think it's something around the performance planning or the planning of whatever field you're working in, and if possible to take that next step on into some form of project management, because then that speaks to a number of the other areas we've covered around self-awareness, self-management, the things that Rusty just described a little bit earlier. I do think there's also an element of communication skills in all of this as well. And I think sometimes we take for granted, well, I can share something or talk to whatever. But actually, when you try to write it, or you're sharing information more broadly, or how you do a slide or whatever it is, some of those do have a think about some of those general skill sets, because we've all got to be able to convey information in a way. Some of the trends that you touched on there, Fletch, around culture and the way things that we almost say, well, they're part of how we deliver and are. I think there's going to be more of a step up in terms of athletes and their representation in terms of their voice in what's going on, which is absolutely no surprise, and in most of our environments will happen anyway. But there's also definitely something about the player and the person, and understanding those two and how they relate together. So I think the movement away from, well, X comes to a training session, don't know anything else about them, but they had a bad session tonight. It isn't going to be quite like that. We're going to want to understand more about the person, because that will help them. And again, I know I'm sort of not wishing to tell people things they know already, but yeah, there are four or five areas there, and then, you know, you would expect people to be able to do a bit of budget management, and then as you scale up your career, obviously that looks very different as you go through. But I think for me, it's just a little bit around what would you bring to the situation, what are some of the core things that you've got experience of, and then being able to articulate that as well. So that would be just a few of the starters for me. I'm conscious I'll go on about it for ages, so I'm happy to pass on now.
What do you think? Oh, second, Andy.
So no, I was just going to jump in and say that. So specifically for rugby, that I think that there will be a trend of teams not having such large coaching staffs in terms of your specialists. So your line-out specialist, your scrum specialist. I think we might almost, because financially the clubs can't afford it, I think we might go back to the sort of head coach, one or two assistant coach areas. Now, the benefit for some people is actually the generalist might become king. So if you can coach attack and defence, then actually you open yourself up to potentially more roles. That's in the kind of professional era. I think that there is going to be an increasing trend of university rugby, and that's in the UK, but also in the US as well. I think the Bucks Super League is almost going to become a de facto senior academy for professional teams. And therefore, because universities looking to attract the student money, because now fees are, I think it's 19,000 or something like that, they're going to be able to offer more. And I think there's going to be a lot more sport on offer at British universities. US are streets years ahead of the UK in terms of that, in terms of professionalising sort of university or college sport. But interestingly, I think in the US, as long as the MLR doesn't fold, I think there's going to be a larger number of rugby jobs in US colleges, because recently MLR have just had their first draft, which, for those who are unfamiliar with American sport, it's the mechanism by which college players from any sport get to the professional arena. So that's NFL, NBA, and so on. Well, the Major League Rugby have just done that a number of months back. What that's going to do is that's going to create pathways at universities to professional rugby to attract the student dollar. And they're going to give rugby varsity status, which means it can therefore attract university funding for coaches and access to facilities and so on and so on. In the same way that the football, lacrosse, and the basketball has full-time head coaches and assistant coaches, I think that if rugby in America carries on going in the trajectory it's going, the opportunity will be in the university system.
Just to add on to that, I just did a podcast with Farah Douglas, who's doing that in America. So if anyone wants any connections around that to better understand it, and yeah, I think they're definitely accessing more funding. What skills did you think they were going to say, Fletch?
Yeah, similar. I would definitely agree with the generalist within rugby. I think we've gone through this sort of journey around specialist and probably come back in full circle and go as well. Actually, if what Alex says is true, and it is absolutely that we want the players to take more responsibility, then we probably need to afford them more opportunities to do that. So coaching will be more generalists. So specifically rugby, that's what I think it'll be. I think people who have a better awareness around self and preferences and things associated with that, and definitely around sort of mental well-being, mental health. So there's loads of really good free stuff that you can just jump on. Lots of good webinars around it. So to build your awareness around that would be useful, I think, moving forward. You can fill in the gaps.
Well, actually, so when you spoke about the pages, Andy, one of the CVs I had a whole page of GCSE results which I'm not sure is the best use of space. Open Uni do some real good stuff around like coach development. They do some psych stuff. A couple of people I've spoken to, so Aaron James is at Uni of Bath. He's just been doing some of the ILM stuff around kind of coaching in business. So that's definitely something I'm going to touch on the 21st, is because I'm going to get Luke, who works for VEA, and I'm going to get Ross from Abbott to come and speak about that. The mental health, someone just messaged me actually and said they've just got some work doing as a mental health champion in, I'm not sure can't remember where it was. The courses that have been helpful for me, because actually I don't have loads of, I've got like, probably same as you, Fletch, like my RFU levels and that, but the RFU educator, the RFU developer course, if they still exist, I think a good course is to have on your CV. And then I would agree with you, Fletch, on so what's helped me get some work recently has been the fact that I did Insights. Now, I guess the challenge is it's quite expensive. And we just recently did Spotlight, and that's been really helpful. And that's helped me get work. And also I've done Disc, which was the cheapest one of them all, but I did that because hockey use it. The other thing that I'm trying to, so I'm actually going back to study, so I'll be studying when I'm 50, because the other thing that I think is going to become important with the interdisciplinary, is with the generalist, is just understanding S&C, psych, everything. And one of the things that people struggled with the interviewers, and you used the word, Alex, was how are you going to periodize psychology, or how are you going to integrate S&C? And because the reality for some of the roles we're talking about, Fletch, is they don't have a full-time psych. Well, they might have an S&C, but it might only be for a certain number. So if that's something that someone said to you S&C and you were thinking, oh God, then at least go and hang out with some S&C people and find out some stuff off them would be my advice.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think post-COVID or towards the back end of or in COVID, I do think mental well-being, mental health, the government are going to start shining the light around that, and around physical well-being as well, which would be quite generalist. I think they'll probably shine the torch away from sports and a little bit more on activity. So again, local authorities, people who are in position to deliver activity, if that's worth considering, is also something to be thinking about. Or if you want to go it by yourself, so if you want you and a couple of pals to do some stuff, then that's the stuff that I'd be thinking about, would be general activity around physical and mental health.
I'm gonna ask you, Andy, about like going it on your own, and you just triggered me, Fletch. So one of my mates, that's how he now makes his money. He delivers the mental health courses. So actually created a niche in doing that. Andy, you spoke at the start briefly about, do you want to work for a full-time job, or do you want to kind of go it on your own? Why did you mention that?
So I think that there is real opportunity for some people, and it probably depends on how they're made up and what they think. But there's a real opportunity for people to actually create their own job, and by that I mean set themselves up to work for yourself, and that could be rugby coaching. It could almost be anything. But actually, if we're talking about rugby coaching, it is really easy to register a company name with Companies House, get your qualification for any given sport, and then go and start coaching. Now, what some people can do, and it is an opportunity for some, is let's say you have an individual and they have a partner, and their combined income is whatever amount per year. Well, if actually one of them was paid less, could they still cover the basics of maybe mortgage, rents, so on and so on? And if they can, well, actually, someone going part-time or even going full-time on their own, but perhaps not being paid as much, would allow them to chase the dream, or at least do the job that they really want. And also, the upshot of going part-time is actually you've got potentially more time at home, better work-life balance. I think something that's happened at the moment is that people have really liked the better work-life balance with no commute, working from home and so on. Well, actually, you might be able to achieve that with a bit of a sort of a career or a mental shift in the way that you think about work and how you earn money.
Yeah, and maybe you're on that self-employment stuff, and maybe this is what this also can branch out into. I just think people just need like the critical thinking partner. There's loads and loads of opportunities, and I'm sure lots of people have already got some awesome ideas in their head, and just bouncing that around people. So, Annie, and I don't know if you can help or Alex can help with this, but I do think what sport needs is to support the entrepreneurship that is out there. There's some amazing people who have some amazing skills, and there's little pockets of opportunity and pockets of finance and money, and people just probably need to connect a little bit. So if everybody in this call happened to be in one office, we would be smashing it. So I think we do need to try and create that, or somebody or something needs to create that, where maybe it's similar to that sense making. We just pick out, what's the population you want to work for? What is it? Let's get 4 or 5 people, chuck some ideas around each other. And there just might be, they might form some contacts that they can go off, and who knows where that's going to go, but definitely sort of run some ideas. I spoke to somebody in the Czech Republic, a guy I used to coach ages ago, and he's got me thinking. So he phoned up for some advice. He got me thinking about stuff, and I'm thinking, that's a pretty good idea what he's thinking about. I'd kind of thought about it in the past, parked it a bit, and I'm now thinking, yeah. And one thing I do have is time. I have some time on my hands to maybe give it some more thought. Andy, what's your thoughts on that, mate?
The opportunity now to start something is enormous. And even if somebody starts it and it doesn't really work out, actually, as long as you haven't splashed a load of cash in it, it doesn't really matter. I think it costs £16 to register a company's house, so that you can therefore apply for a business bank account. It costs you however much to go into your RFU coaching qualification, at which point you can then open, or you could start, Rusty's Riotous Kids Coaching Limited, and you're part-time taking kids at weekends or evenings and that kind of thing. So I think that if someone has an idea, I would say now is the time to do it. If there probably isn't ever a good time, but there's definitely a bad time, and now is a better time to do it if you've got an idea, and it could be anything. I quite like the sound of Rusty's Riotous Kids Coaching Limited. I might set that up.
I'm just setting up. Alex is gonna. I'm sure he's gonna answer this question, but you can also get information really quickly, because you can actually just put on LinkedIn or put on Twitter. Look, I'm offering mentoring, or who's looking for their riotous kids to be looked after, type thing. Camps are massive at the moment. Like, I decided not to do one in October because of COVID, but I'm seeing like Eugene's been over in Bristol, and Warren's been doing loads of stuff, and like parents are desperate for their kids to get out. But you can test the water pretty quickly. You don't have to. You might go, oh look, due to unforeseen circumstances, we've had to cancel it if 2 people reply. But if 20 people reply, then you're starting something, aren't you? Alex, you wrote down the bit about everyone connecting and stuff. What were you thinking about when?
Yeah, I suppose it links a little bit to Fletcher's thoughts that earlier about critical friends. And one of the things that I think is a very common sort of thread through all of our conversations is just your support network around you at this time and going forward. But also not being afraid to check and challenge your thinking, which when you're sort of, well, I've got this idea, I think it might work, but I'm not sure. And actually, sometimes the best way to work out if something's going to work is just to do it. And as Andy says, if you can have a minimal cash outlay and it's your time, and you can still pay a bill, whatever you need to do. But there's certainly the one thing I've noticed, well, there's lots of things you can notice from COVID depending on your experience, but people are willing and well intended to help and support each other at this time. So to the comment around Twitter, LinkedIn, if you put up a genuine request for, I need to know more about this, or I want to understand that, or thinking of doing X, there seems to be this real engagement with it, which is just fantastic. And I think it is a moment in time. So I think, to Andy's point, this is a time to capitalise on. And if you've got that idea, that sort of acorn, you like it's there, and you know it's growing. Probably one of the other big areas that we'll see a lot of focus and sort of fits with our trends is around diversity and inclusion. Now, again, you know, not that that isn't something we're all thinking about in some way, but again, if you've got a passion or an area of interest in that, never is a better time than now to really think about how you could push that forward. So, and I suppose it's then where you connect up with others and take a little bit of a following with you, because whenever we start out on our own, it's not only going to be us that makes it. And I think that's the important bit, to have a bit of a solid base to take those next steps from. And it's reiterating some of those messages from our first session, really, about that community, that network. And then I've got to be honest, just, you know, not being afraid that someone might say no, you know, but at the moment, I think there is, you know, this real opportunity to capitalise on that good intention that exists. So yeah, so those are kind of some of the thoughts I was having.
Nice. I'm going to ask John's question. It doesn't have to be on your own either, because like I set up with Fletch because then I wouldn't be lonely. Like the two of us could do stuff, and actually, if it didn't go so well, then we could half the losses.
Half the losses.
Andy, you got my dream job. I mean, except I didn't get it. However, what I would say is, so that's been a good piece of advice for me, as Fletch will know. So I've got like definitely in my top 5 jobs coming up in October, but only because I'd been thinking about emailing someone for a month, and I hadn't had the bravery to do it, had I? And then I did it, and I was like, type stuff, and it's worked out really well. But I was like properly scared about doing it.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, and clearly there's lots of people who don't sort of hook up with somebody else or form a little team. I would have found it a lot more difficult without sort of just running stuff past not only Rusty but the Magic Stig. I do think if you can find some people who are similar but different enough that it's going to be helpful, I do think it's easier. And I don't know what you feel, Rusty. I would have.
Well, the reality of the Magic Stig is everything would be in our heads, because we are not people that get stuff done necessarily. Yeah. And so complementary skills, so finding someone who, and the Stig is really very opposite to me. He won't mind me saying that. He's probably quite pleased he's the opposite of me. But that's been critical, really. I mean, we wouldn't have done it without. Last question. So John's questions put kind of a bit about some of the, says he sometimes feels quite cringy listing the soft skills on the CV, creative problem solver, critical thinker, team player. And that was probably the stuff I was referencing. When I saw that like skills, and it was just a list of, you know, critical thinker, creative team player, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I guess my view would have been, I think those skills are really important, and actually, when have you learned them, and how does that fit into your experiences? But what are you thinking about that, Andy?
So I think that anything you put on your CV, you need to back up with an example. So if you put critical thinker, then be prepared for someone to say, so give me an example of when you've done that, or the experience you've gained from that, or something. So you can list whatever you want on your CV. You can have any style or format, but whatever's on there, you must be able to back up with an example. It doesn't have to be within the last week or two. It can be from several years ago. It doesn't matter.
Would you put the example on the CV?
If you have enough space. If not, I would leave it off. The industry standard is 2 sides, because it's one piece of paper, 2 sides of A4. That actually, for someone who might have had 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 jobs in their career, some of which are relevant, some of it aren't, but that's actually not that much space. Once you format everything, and you know, so you could absolutely put, you know, the example, or at least, you know, bullet point the maybe as well, just to save a bit of space. But if you have the space to do it, do it. If not, just be prepared to have it in your head if someone says so. Give me an example of when you've done A, B, or C.
Nice. Alex, any thoughts on that? Any final words?
No, I think I find that using some of the language that's in the role spec is super helpful as well, because if you're reading through and you're on the receiving end, actually being able to kind of go, all right, so we've talked about setting a strategic vision, or we've talked about problems, and they then linked it in the CV and talked to it with an evidence or an experience that they've had. That's just really helpful. But absolutely be prepared. If you're going to say, I'm a great critical thinker, or I can do problem solving standing on my head, whatever, make sure you can talk to it and the range of examples in it as well. So yeah, I think that's it. You know, there's certainly around questions that now people want to know more about. Tell us about the biggest problem you've solved. How'd you go about it? Talk to us about what you did when things went wrong. What made you do that? What were your reference points? Those kind of things. So it's just being able to kind of delve into those deeper levels as well.
Nice. Andy, Alex, thanks for your wisdom and jumping on. I'm mindful of people's time. Is everyone happy if people reach out to them that they'll get some stuff back? I can confirm that Andy will send you jobs all the time.
Thanks, Rusty. Yeah,
I think you're working for my wife, because you keep saying, oh, mate, do you want to go and work in Hong Kong? And just thinks she wants rid of me. But I think I genuinely think it's class, the stuff you do. Like, I would struggle without it.
Thank you. It's very kind of you, mate.
So look, thanks for jumping on, everyone. Have a great evening. And as I say, if you ever want to reach out, you've got all our deets on there, and or find us on Twitter or wherever. But over and out. Peace out.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Andy. Well done. Appreciate you jumping on.
No worries at all, mate. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, no, top man. Thanks, and I'll keep you in the loop on the 21st. Yeah, cool. No after party, because I'm going to go and see what the Bristol Saints score is.
See if Edrada scored. Yeah,
I think.
Now there's an example of how sevens develops an individual, but that's the conversation for different.
Pineapple, stop it. Seriously, don't get him going about sevens.
Luke, what's his name? I'm having a mind blank. The Welsh captain. He's just done a video on it actually on YouTube. It's quite good.
Oh, I saw that. Yes, yeah, I did see that. Yeah, that's good. Yes,
right,
that's
I'm going
good.
to watch rugby.
Right, good night, guys.
Thanks,
All the
mate.
best.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everyone.